All right. Hi, my name is Yea-Seul Kim. I'm a PhD student at University of Washington. This work is in collaboration with Katharina Reinecke and my advisor, Jessica Hullman. So visualization has been acknowledged as a useful tool to present data to both lay people and expert audience. For example, imagine I'm a data journalist writing a story about home price in Denver. I plan to add a visualization to help reader understand the trend of house price in 2014 through 16. I could just show you this data right now, but what if I ask you to imagine what it looked like first? So can everybody who are able to do it hold your arm out and indicate your prediction? So shoulder will be your 2014, and elbow will be 15, and tip will be 16. All right, so hold your arm for a moment, and can you compare your prediction that your arm indicates and then actual data that on the screen? And can you generate some explanation to yourself why and how your prediction is different from the actual data? Great, so even if we didn't have any specific knowledge on median house price in Denver in 2014 through 16, we have some relevant prior knowledge that we can leverage on to make a prediction, such as house price tends to go up, or Denver has many quality jobs. So then, when you notice the gap between your prediction and the actual data, self-explanation can make you to fill the gap between your prior knowledge and the reality. So this work is all about evaluating the effect of predicting and explaining the data. So based on our study, I can say that exercise you just did will make you to remember Denver's house price accurately. So now I'll walk you through how we get the result. Our main research question is, what is the effect of reflecting on one's prior knowledge during a visualization interaction? To formulate our hypothesis, we first look at the research on cognitive psychology that describes the role of internal representation. So internal representation is your mental image of some concept. In previous exercise, for example, the image you already have about house price trend or Denver can be your internal representation of the data. So previous study indicates that actively construct an externalized internal representation of a concept leads better understanding of concept and increase the probability of retain that information. So we also look at the well-known technique in education called self-explanation that focuses on active learning. So self-explanation is self-generated explanation of presented information, like we did in the exercise. So when quality self-explanation are generated, comprehension tends to be better than without self-explanation. Lastly, a person's curiosity peaked when she perceived an information gap between her current knowledge and the information she's interested in. So going back to our exercise, when you notice the gap between your prediction and the actual data, curiosity might arouse and motivate you to seek more information to fill the gap between your prior knowledge and the actual data. So now we know reflecting on prior knowledge can be directly and indirectly beneficial to comprehension of visualization. So we decide to test the effect of reflecting on prior knowledge on ability to recall or visualize data as an operationalized form of comprehension of the visualization. Then, how can we elicit a viewer's prior knowledge and inspire them to reflect on it while interacting with a visualization? So we designed 3 mechanisms that might help viewer reflect on their prior knowledge. So prompting viewer to explain about data can be a good way to make people to reflect on their prior knowledge. So while examining the visualization, we can prompt the viewer to type in their self-explanation about data in a text box. Next, asking to predict about data might facilitate the active reflection on their prior knowledge as well. So before seeing the data, we can let viewer to draw about their expectation. Lastly, providing feedback about the gap between their prior knowledge and the actual data can help people focus more on their prior knowledge. So using these 3 mechanisms, we designed Elicitation Condition to actually test how these mechanisms impact on the user's ability to recall. So first condition is explain-only condition, where the viewer is prompted to type self-explanation about as she examined the actual data. And next, predict-only condition, where the viewer is prompted to predict about dataset before seeing them. we merged two mechanisms where the viewers are prompted to predict first and then generate the explanation about the gap between their prediction and the actual data. We also combined the predict and feedback mechanisms where the viewers are prompted to predict first and examine the actual data and the feedback at the same time. Lastly, we have a baseline condition where the viewers are prompted to only examine the actual data. To observe the effect of condition between text and visual modality, the data is presented with visualization for visual condition and using text in the text condition. So our first hypothesis is that self-explanation condition will recall the data more accurately than the baseline condition. Since the efficacy of self-explanation in education has been proved mostly with text, we would like to test its usefulness in a visualization setting. Secondly, we hypothesize that all predict condition will outperform to recall the data accurately compared to the baseline. The reason why we suspect that the prediction will improve a person's ability to recall is that, first, constructing and externalizing the prior knowledge can improve comprehension, but also when the viewer's prediction is shown alongside the data, the gap between viewer's prior knowledge and the data will be visually perceivable, so that it requires less effort for the viewer to adjust their knowledge. Lastly, we also expect the effect of prediction will be less pronounced in the text condition. As opposed to visual prediction condition on the left, the participants in the predict text condition must actively seek and infer the gap, which will make them harder to adjust their information. So now to validate our hypothesis, we conducted a control study of mechanical Turk. So based on the result of the PAR analysis using our pilot data, we recruited 42 participants per condition. So we have total 9 conditions generated by conjugating modality factor and elicitation technique factor. We excluded a predict feedback condition on the text modality treatment due to the difficulty of generating personalized feedback based on the free-form text prediction. So to test our hypothesis, we need a visualization to test on. So we chose to use 2x3 line graph that has 2 categorical variables and 1 quantitative variable, which is widely used in social and physical sciences. Also, this format allows us to observe how participants can recall high-level patterns as well as the individual data points. So now we decided which format to use. We need to have a data set for the visualization. We would like to have a data set with properties that are amenable for our technique. So if a viewer is extremely familiar with a data set, prediction or explanation may not offer benefits over their prior knowledge. If data set is too unfamiliar, it'll be too difficult for a viewer to make a prediction or explanation about it. So to select one data set for our main study that are moderately familiar to viewer, we conducted a preliminary survey on Amazon Mechanical Turk. So detailed description of this survey is in our paper, and as a result of this survey, we chose to use voting result data sets, which I'll explain in detail next page. So this voting result data set describes the percentage of eligible voter of 3 ethnicity by 2 income brackets who vote for Republican candidates in the 2008 presidential election. This is what the data looked like in text condition. So here's our overview of study procedure. So first, participants were asked to read about our task and the description about data as well. And then next, if participants are assigned to one of prediction condition, they're asked to draw or type in their prediction. If participants are not asked to predict, they're asked to retype a general text on the election to maintain similar engagement level. In this stage, all participants see the actual data. If the participants are assigned to one of predict condition, their prediction will be shown alongside the actual data in this page. If participants are assigned to one of explain condition, participants are asked to type in their explanation either about the actual data or their gap between prediction and the actual data based on the assigned condition. Also, participants in predict feedback condition are asked to examine the feedback, which says whether they were overestimated or underestimated of data and by how much. So participants in the baseline condition are asked to examine only the actual data. So after examining the actual data, but before recalling them, all participants were asked to complete 10 paper folding tasks for 3 minutes as a distractor task. A task also served to gather information on spatial reasoning ability for participants, which have been shown to correlate with the effective use of internal representation. So after completing the text forwarding task, participants in all conditions are asked to recall the value of the actual data. Participants use an interface that matched the modality by which they view the data. So we considered two types of recall error indicating how well participants could recall the actual data. So accuracy in recalling individual data points is measured using the absolute recall error by calculating distance between participants' recalled value and the actual data points. We also calculate the trend error to measure accuracy in recalling the high-level structure of datasets by calculating slope difference between participants' recalled slope and the actual data slope. So to analyze the results, we used a mixed effect model that allows us to see the effects of each condition compared to the baseline. So in this page, I'll introduce the result of absolute recall error that tells us how technique can help participants to recall individual points accurately. So remember how we have a baseline condition, explain only condition, and predict and explain condition, and predict and feedback condition, and predict only condition. So these bar indicates the absolute error, which shorter bar indicates that participants in that condition recall the data more accurately. The shorter, the better. So we use standard error to create the error bar. In visual conditions, participants from all four elicitation conditions recall the individual data point more accurately than those in the baseline condition. We found no performance difference between conditions. But participants in text condition, however, only participants in the explain condition outperform than the participants in the baseline condition. The solid fill rectangle indicates the reliable effect of condition on affecting the participant's ability to recall. We did not see the reliable effect of predict condition with text modality as we hypothesized. It contrasts to the results from visual condition, and again, it may due to the fact that the participants in the text condition should have actively seek and infer the gap to fill, as opposed to the visual condition where the gap is visually available. Now we'll see the result for trend recall error, which tell us how participants accurately recall the slope of the actual data. So we see reliable effects of improving trend recall error for two predict conditions with visual modality. For text condition, however, none of techniques show reliable effect of decreasing trend error compared to the baseline. So we conducted two additional replication of our study. So this time, we presented a scientific experiment result as a low familiarity data set and a fast food calorie content as a high familiarity data set. We replicated only visual conditions. For low familiarity data set, we observed a similar pattern of effective condition as for the main study, with the exception of predict-only condition. But we didn't find the effective technique in high familiarity data set. Maybe participants were too familiar with data sets. Prediction or explanation did not offer the benefit over their prior knowledge. So our contribution of our work is that first, we extend prior work on self-explanation in education by showing that prompting viewer to self-explain the data visualization can improve their ability to recall. Additionally, our work is first to show that prediction task improves viewers' ability to recall with and without feedback and explanation. We replicated our control study with data sets that differs in familiarity, and we found that this technique improves recall for data sets when a viewer has low or moderate familiarity. Lastly, we characterized the design space of data prediction and feedback technique. So detail is in our paper. So here's a few examples how we can expand our prediction task. So we're so excited about this study result because it paves the way for a new paradigm of interactive visualization. So current visualization research and practice lacks technique for explicitly incorporating a viewer's prior knowledge. So we think that there's a lot of work to do in envisioning what possibility exists in terms of interactive technique, as well as studying the effect of this technique. So here's one take-home message from our talk, predicting and explain data visualization improves the ability to recall the data. So now I'm happy to take any question, and also happy to see anybody who could accurately recall the Denver house price as well. Thank you.
All right, any questions? So I wanted to ask one. Actually, I guess I didn't introduce myself, but I'm Wesley Willett from the University of Calgary. So I'm curious, given the experiments that you've run, if you have a sense for how much of a recipe you have for validating some of these other alternative prediction mechanisms for other kinds of charts. Do you sort of feel like you can actually replicate the same process to do this if you're looking at distribution on maps or bar charts and these kinds of things?
Yeah, I think in terms of mechanism, I think it can be applicable, but the thing is, how do you visualize the actual data versus your prediction, and how do you give them a feedback about the gap might be different. So in terms of like mechanism, I think it might apply, but there might be a designer's effort should be needed to design that stimuli to test it, I guess.
Hey, Matt Kay, University of Michigan. So this is really great, awesome work. I think it's really cool. And one of the things that I'm thinking as I'm watching a presentation is thinking about the final recall task as sort of an elicitation of a Bayesian posterior, combining their prior beliefs and the evidence they got from what you told them after they gave you their prediction. And if you think about it that way, that to me slightly explains the familiarity issue, right? Their prior is stronger, so the update is less. Is there a way then from that perspective to say, how do you redesign, or how do you design the, here's what the data looks like, such that it's emphasizing the strength of the evidence and how much they should be updating?
Can you repeat the question again?
So like, in whatever case it is, right? Like, so if I'm just drawing the line of what the trend looks like, right? What I really want to say is, we really, really know that this is what the trend is. Whatever you believed before, you should really believe this, right? Like, is there a way of communicating that to people so that even when they're in high familiarity conditions, they should still update better or more towards?
I think that data set we use is sort of like objective already, so it's a past event, so people might believe it in that data more, but I think later on we can incorporate some of the believability first about the data set so that we can take into account of how much they believe first, and then how can we make that believability better later on. I think it's a little sort of different metric here than what we measure, but I definitely think that there's some work should be done in that area as well.
Cool, thank you.
Hi, Lindsay Franklin, Pacific Northwest National Lab. This is kind of a similar question, perhaps. Was there any kind of effect of whether or not their explanations in the beginning were close to reality versus the way things actually were, or maybe a better way of asking that is, if people explain things completely wrong, did they still have the same recall compared to people who explain things close to correct?
Yeah, we haven't taken a careful look at their explanation that they generate, but we see some effects of anchor effect. Somehow you already, your prediction is very close to the actual data already, then they recall better later. So there is a slight anchor effect there, but we haven't looked at the explanation they generated.
Okay, cool, thank you, great stuff.
Thanks. Søren Knudsen, University of Calgary. Thank you for a very interesting work. I'd be curious to understand, maybe I missed this in your talk, is it the act of predicting the data that makes them remember? Or is it the act of visually working with the visualization? So for instance, would they be equally able to remember if they had to draw a trend for another city than drawing what they expected for Denver? Does your study tell anything about that? Or?
So I think it's a little bit of both. Like predicting itself makes you to be actively involved in this interface, and also seeing those gaps also help you to close the gap. So your question is, if you're predicting another city, after you doing this exercise, would that help you to remember other cities' data better?
No, I'm thinking if it's merely the act of actually working and interacting with the visualization that makes you remember, or if it's the act that you think about the data that you expect that makes you remember.
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, it's hard to tell from our experiment, but there will be a future work to like try to validate what is from where.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.